Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share a part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Through the gifts of technology, we also gather virtually to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Welcome to all those who are joining us in this way today. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love.
Arise, O souls, arise.
Good morning. I'm David Yackel. I'm a member of All Souls, and I echo now the welcome statement in the video, both for those here and those watching online. When we say welcome here at All Souls Church, we welcome you. You with all the identities you hold in your fullness as a person. You're a welcome here. We hope that you will bring your whole self to this time together. We welcome those who have long been a part of our community and those here for the first time. Please extend this welcome through conversations with new faces after the service and maybe be the beginning of a warm relationship. In that same spirit of welcome, joining us for her second Sunday with us is our newest minister, Reverend Erin Dyka Holly. A warm welcome to Reverend Holly. Today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back to the pulpit our senior minister, Reverend Kendyl Gibbons. Reverend Gibbons will share with us insight into the humanism that developed in the early 20th century. She will offer her perspective on the need for humanism to evolve further and the need to articulate that new vision of personal and collective human thriving. Welcome, Kendyl Gibbons.
In the 5th century of our common era, the Hindu philosopher and poet Kalidasa invited his readers to greet the beginning of each new day with a blessing that invoked not the supernatural powers, but rather their own spiritual wisdom and insight. He told them, "Look to this day, for it is life, the very essence of life. In its brief course lie all the truths and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is already a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Let this be our salutation to the dawn, he said. In our own century, the English poet John O'Donohue offers this additional intention. May I live this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, gracious in awareness, courageous in thought, and generous in love. 1 century ago, one of the founders of modern humanism, Felix Adler, expressed many of the same aspirations in a hymn. These classics still resonate for humanists today. Let's rise in body or spirit as we are able and sing together, following which please remain standing for our words of covenant. Now will you join me in speaking once again the words of our covenant promise to one another in community. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now be seated. Thank you. This commitment to human fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. Therefore, we set aside this moment in our time together to share with one another the joys and concerns which are now shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us all to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. My joy this morning is to have my friend and colleague, Reverend Aaron, as part of our community and part of our church staff. So thank you for welcoming her so warmly this morning, and thank you, Aaron, for being part of our community. Now we will have, if you prefer not to appear on camera for our online service, we will have a moment towards the end of our sharing when the cameras will be turned off. If you want to wait, I will let you know when that happens. Are there any joys or concerns that you'd like to share before then?
I'm Don Dickey. This week I did some carpentry work. Needed to repair the rotten boards on my wooden deck. And I'm thankful I've got a lot of tools. I'm thankful I know how to use them. And I'm really glad my knees held out for 4 days.
My name's Barbara Lee, and I moved away from Kansas City 2 years ago to Florida, which is great, and I live in Fort Myers, which you may have heard of. I have great concern for the people there, especially on Fort Myers Beach area, where things were totally flattened. We came out very, very lucky. We lost most of our roof and had a lot of tree branches down, but nothing really serious. But there's still a lot of work going on, and we just decided to get away from there for a little while. Came up north to see my daughter and grandson Riley here, and it's lovely. I didn't pack enough long pants or long sleeve shirts, but my daughter's about my size, so she's helping me out. Anyway, I just wanted to share that concern, which will go on for a long time in Fort Myers, Florida.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad you're okay.
Hello, I'm the grandson, Riley. I have the same joy that my grandma's here and concern for Florida, but what I wanted to say was I have a combination joy and concern for all the women and men in the Middle East that are fighting to end the rule of hijab, requiring it, and all the people that are fighting for it to be someone's individual choice. So I hope that they continue to do that, because everyone deserves that freedom to express themselves as they want to.
Good morning. I'm Sebastian Stiles. Many of you know me, some of you do not. Somebody came to the park yesterday while we were feeding the houseless and approached me and letting me know that there is a great need for hurricane relief specialists down there right now. And I am going tomorrow morning to apply for a job to go down to Florida. It's a 2-week contract job, but will probably be extended. So I want to thank all of you so much for being my family and helping me get back on my feet after being homeless, after a fire. And hopefully I can represent All Souls Unitarian and go down there and help people get back on their feet. Thank you.
Just a forewarning, I'm definitely going to cry. I'm on testosterone, so I dry for literally anything. So 5 years ago, almost exactly, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma, and it had metastasized to his brain, his spine, his liver, his lung. And they told us even with treatment, he would live for a year. And 6 months later, I joined All Souls because I knew I couldn't handle that alone and I needed a community with me. So that diagnosis is what led me here. 2 months ago, they stopped immunotherapy because it had shrunk enough that they don't need to do it anymore. And he got to meet my son last Christmas. So the cancer is mostly gone. It's a miracle, it really is. I just thank you guys because you guys were here for me through all of that.
My name is Beth Andes, and I have, I guess, both a sadness. My old cat is no longer with us. She was a good girl, and she let me know when her time had come. But anyway, the joy is that I got to visit my son Sean in Seattle and climb over the mountains. I know, to no one's surprise, he outclimbed me a lot. But he's happy, he's healthy, he's in a family that he's created for himself, an interesting community that brings him peace and joy. And I'm just glad he's okay. I had to go out and see for myself. Anyway, thanks.
Hi, my name is Jamie Taylor. My husband is John Harder, who, when I left the house, he was laying on the living room floor because Saturday he kinked his back or whatever you do, and you throw it out. So we're hoping he's all better by tomorrow. He's getting better.
Out, we will turn away the cameras, so if you're wanting to not appear, you are now welcome to come forward and share your joy or concern. of the Spirit that abide unspoken in our hearts, and invite you, the congregation, to join me in our congregational response on the screen. We share this journey of life and faith in the hope that we might help one another to enjoy the gifts of life without arrogance, and to take responsible part in leaving for the future a more just and useful world than our ancestors knew. This we can only do by working together and supporting one another.
Good morning. I'm Bonnie Postlethwaite. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Trustees. The one thing I love about this church is its diversity of backgrounds of all of our members and the variety of ways that we all live out our 7 principles. With such a rich spectrum of backgrounds, we can approach new challenges creatively to come up with new ways of approaching needed changes. So too do we approach our fundraising and stewardship with a variety of approaches. Take, for instance, our recent clothes drive, which helped me, incentivized me to clean out my closets. and at the same time, it helped the church. Today, I ask that you use one of our many ways of giving directly to this welcoming church. Many of you have automatic payments toward your pledge, and that is wonderful and ever so convenient. But at any time, you can log into our online giving app and donate. And of course, you can also donate if you are here and the basket is passed. So I hope that you will either use the giving app or drop a few extra dollars into the basket today to contribute to our general budget. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in dedicating the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Our first reading is from Unitarian William Channing Gannett, from The Faith of Ethics and the Thought of God, which he wrote in 1889. So please do your best to come into the language of the 19th century with me. But as to names, let those for whom the inadequacy of all words about the infinite dims truth say neither God, nor love, nor Father. Let such keep silence, and let their silence be revered as reverence by those who find the poverty of words less poor than silence to voice their sense of the mystery and the blessedness. Just as reverently let those who choose the silence bear with those who break it. Most certainly the one that moves within the crystallizing atoms as in the rhythms of history, within the shining suns as in the light that lighteth every soul of man. Most certainly this omnipresent moral energy is not a mighty patriarch, is not the very tenderest mother. The fact transcends all dreams of personality. Our many names at utmost best are only poems, emblems, symbols, ideola to help the mind. Idols. Let the word be spoken fearlessly. These names are but idols of the mind. But know that what idol means. The secret lies revealed in eidolon, the Greek original, an image serving to make thought more visible to consciousness. Man scarcely thinks at all, except in idols. Language is one vast compact of fragmentary images. With this imaging necessity upon us, it does not long avail us to dismantle our cathedrals, whitewash frescoes, and forswear symbolism in the interest of truth. Man has a birthright to poetry and symbolism, and they will not be denied out of him. If denied in one set of terms, they are sure to come back before long in another. True, ever and again, we need our Puritans to denounce the symbol, to save from overuse and misuse of the helpful idols, to rescue us from idolatry. There are today among us men, their whole heart throbbing with religiousness, who zealously deny our sacred names. Since it is morality alone that makes the God so real, so live, so near and dear to us, we ought to thank whoever emphasizes that supremely. These ethical culture friends of ours will deepen spiritual perception in us. They are prophets of the living God, whose name, for the God's sake, they would fain forbid to men, even as in elder time, for the God's sake, prophets forbade his graven image. But grateful for and not mindful of their warning, we need not go out to dwell with these reformers in the dry lands of their prose. There is a nobler way. Be braver all, be fairer too. Say, Our Father, Christ, Madonna, Yet, saying these, beware. We easily may make them idols in the hurtful sense, mistaking form for substance. Forget not, they are symbols, and all inadequate to name the God we worship, the life and love in which we live, of which we are a part. Or refuse to say, Our Father, if truthfulness forbid you, but beware as much in that refusal. For to fear idols for oneself, or to rave at them in others, is still to fear and rave at idols. Make not thou the form for substance. To put both warnings into one, beware of deeming it either the essence of religion or the essence of superstition to say God and Father. To think it either is to confound the names with realities, and that is the superstition, that the sacrilege.
Our second reading today is Reluctance by Robert Frost. Out through the fields and the woods and over the walls I have wended. I have climbed the hills of view and looked at the world and descended. I have come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. The leaves are all dead on the ground, save those that the oak is keeping to ravel them one by one and let them go scraping and creeping out over the crusted snow when others are sleeping. And the dead leaves lie huddled and still, no longer blown hither and thither. The last lone aster is gone, the flowers of the witch hazel wither. The heart is still aching to seek, but the feet question whither. And when, to the human heart, was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things, to yield with a grace to reason, and bow and accept the end of a love or a season?
Unitarian Universalists have long been in the practice of referring to our spiritual lives as journeys, assuming that we start out headed in one direction and end up somewhere else altogether. As individuals, we all grow and change over the course of our lifetimes. You might say we evolve, just as our movement has done over the course of history. It can be easier to identify the chapters of our collective story sometimes than it is to break down the process by which we have each arrived at claiming the particular identity that comes to define us as religious adults who understand ourselves as members of a faith minority in a popularly Christian culture. I invite you to ponder how you might respond if someone asked you, how did you first know that you were an atheist or a liberal Christian, an agnostic or a non-religious person or a humanist, or whatever you might say you are at this point in your development? For myself, I have to acknowledge that my own humanist identity began long ago in a Sunday school classroom rented from a Seventh-day Adventist church where our Unitarian Universalist religious education lessons derived from the work of the innovative religious educator, Reverend Sophia Faz, emphasized the intuitive spiritual curiosity and insight of every child and sought to encourage us to question boldly, to think creatively, and to claim the entire canon of spiritual poetry and wisdom from all of human culture as our birthright. Rituals, I learned, were much like folk dances. The more of them you knew, the more gracefully you could participate in all of them, and the better of a world citizen you would be. Assuming that I and all of my classmates shared the economic privilege of a suburban backyard, Faz used the illustration of finding a dead bird or other non-domestic creature to introduce the issue of mortality at the level of a child's possible experience and curiosity. The essential difference between alive and dead she identified as the absence of a so-called wonder part. This also identified what caused a plant to sprout from the bean seeds that we routinely planted in Dixie cups of soil every spring, which invariably died of drought and discouragement after we had dutifully marveled at them and subsequently ignored them, leaving their dusty carcasses to ornament our classroom until they were summarily disposed of at the start of the summer break. Wave if you grew up, you remember the bean plants. Faz was perfectly willing for children to talk about God or heaven or angels if they raised these topics spontaneously. And she and her colleagues were eager for children to be familiar with creation stories from a variety of diverse cultures as well as from the Christian Bible, always with a large grain of salt wherever claims of magic or miracles were presented. We learned the realities and the values behind Santa Claus early in my family, a pleasant game that adults and children played with each other at the Christmas season to celebrate the delights of generosity and surprises, having no discernible connection to the birth of Jesus. My parents, who had early outgrown the lukewarm mainline Protestant religions of their own families of origin, taught their children to place a high value on intelligence, authenticity, and clarity of thought, and to respond with skepticism to improbable claims, no matter how attractive. They were open about the fact that neither of them thought it at all probable that such a thing as God existed. Theirs was a gospel of personal responsibility rather than cosmic grace, according to which people generally would, and most likely should, reap what they sowed. When the two of them discovered Unitarian Universalist humanism under the leadership of the Reverend A. Powell Davies at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., during the late 1950s, when Davies and his assistant minister, Reverend James Reeb, were leading the charge for racial integration of the city, It felt like a remarkably good fit to them, and one of the fledgling suburban congregations that All Souls was sponsoring became our family's community of reference throughout my childhood. It was in the pamphlet rack of that church that I learned the power of preaching by reading the reprints of Davies' sermon texts, finding myself resonating to both the poetry of his imagery and the summoning of his call to greater justice and liberty for people of all colors. I took pride in calling myself a Unitarian Universalist and a Humanist, even as I hungered for the comfort of what my Orthodox peers called a prayer life, and wondered what the kind of reverence that would make me want to kneel would feel like. Was there anything worthy of my devotion and demanding of my loyalty as Jesus was for Christians, I asked myself, for it seemed to me that humanism ought not to be merely a lowest common denominator for describing human reverence, moral aspiration, and the perception of an inner life which might have a quality of meaning that could redeem any personal or historic tragedy. When I read Viktor Frankl's account of his experience surviving in a Nazi concentration camp entitled Man's Search for Meaning, where he wrote, "The person who has a why for his life can endure any how," I felt challenged to discover a purpose for my own existence that would enable me to transcend the happenstances of life over which I would have little control. One of the catchphrases of the humanism I grew up with was, "No rescue, no reward," meaning, as I understood it, that we make our decisions with no expectation that good intentions would be rewarded with any assurance of success or any future life of ease and pleasure such as heaven, nor that we would be rescued from the natural consequences of whatever mistakes we might make by any favorable divine providence. To be an ethical person, I concluded, was to accept responsibility for the outcome of my actions and not to seek to be let off the hook by special providence. Humanism as a religious identity and tradition has its own history, the chapters of which are often delineated by memorable landmark sermons. In 1819, for instance, the prominent Boston minister William Ellery Channing preached at the ordination of a young colleague who was beginning his ministry as a newly founded Unitarian church in Baltimore. This represented a significant spread of radically progressive Christianity down the eastern seaboard from the New England roots of Unitarianism, and Channing's sermon was intended to acknowledge the heretical sect as a new denomination and defend its doctrines as a natural and legitimate evolution from traditional Christianity. 22 years later, in 1841, Channing's Unitarian colleague Theodore Parker would avail himself of a similar opportunity to assert that Christianity itself was the product of historical evolution in both ritual practice and in the beliefs that were held as orthodox, in a sermon entitled "The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity." Ralph Waldo Emerson, who had by then left the professional ministry, was invited by the graduating seniors at Harvard Divinity School to present the closing lecture to them in 1825. To the dismay of many of the faculty, he took the opportunity to inform the graduates that they were ill-prepared for their vocation and that the churches they aspired to serve were not meeting their members' needs for community and spiritual sustenance. By the end of the 19th century, this accusation would be reiterated by conservatives who regarded the growth of humanism among Unitarians in the Mississippi River Valley and on the western frontier as a threat to its original identity as Christian. William Channing Gannett, minister of the thriving congregation in St. Paul, Minnesota, labored throughout his career to reconcile the advocates of free religion with those who insisted that Jesus and the Bible had always been and must always be central to their faith. His short covenant statement, which would come to be known as "Things Commonly Believed Among Us," was long remembered as an attempt at reconciliation on behalf of those who sought an inclusive belief statement to fulfill much the same purposes that the present 7 principles serve. But it is his 1891 sermon entitled The Faith of Ethics and the Thought of God, which I think belongs in our tradition's collection of greatest hits, along with Emerson and Parker. For it is here that Gannett advocates for mutual understanding and acceptance between those on the cutting edge of the evolution of the faith and those clinging dearly to the anchor point of something they have long cherished. Each is committed to an authentic form of reverence, he affirmed, and they ought to be able to appreciate that about each other. But even as Gannett labored to hold his era's fast-evolving liberal religious community together, history was taking a hand in the process just across the river in the forming town of Minneapolis, where a popular figure on the national lecture circuit, Professor William Denton, an expert on fossils and geological formations, delivered a series of public lectures with fossil displays, which, much to the irritation of local Orthodox clergy, called into question the biblical account of the world's creation. In spite of these clerical protests, a number of Denton's audience wanted to hear more and urged him to return the following year. They formed themselves into a branch of the national organization called the Liberal League, and Gannett, seeing in the opportunity thus presented, invited the secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference to visit the new city on the frontier and explore with them the possibility of gathering a Unitarian congregation there. Urged by their families to consider the need for liberal religious education for their children, the members of the Liberal League agreed to become a liberal church, provided that the Western Conference could find them a minister as liberal-minded as Denton. Jenkins Lloyd Jones, the conference secretary, had a card up his sleeve. He was acquainted with a recently transferred from the Reformed tradition minister who had been ejected from that church because of the evolution of his beliefs in the liberal direction. Reverend John Hasler Dietrich was again in trouble, now with the Unitarian congregation he was serving in Spokane, Washington, because he was not a supporter of American involvement in the First World War. And he was happy to consider relocating to Minneapolis, where he was assured political controversy was not considered an impediment. Soon after accepting the call to become the founding minister of the Minneapolis Church and moving into the Western Unitarian Conference, Dietrich became acquainted with the Unitarian minister in Geneva, Illinois, Professor Charles Little. Little was undergoing a theological evolution of his own in the direction of what he called the religion of democracy. He recognized much of his own journey in the ideas that Dietrich was preaching, and together they came to the terminology humanism for the new path that they saw emerging, both for themselves and for free religion. Many young ministers, as well as seminary students and faculty, were intrigued by these ideas, and in 1935, Dietrich hired one of them, Raymond Bragg, to be his assistant and successor apparent at the Minneapolis Society. After several years of leadership of the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, Bragg would be called to the ministry of this congregation, a position from which he eventually retired. Dietrich, stricken with grief when his wife died of cancer in 1931, eventually married again to a woman named Margaret Wilson, who eventually became his literary executor and completed the autobiography on which he was working when he died in 1957. This book included an often cited paragraph which states in Dietrich's supposed voice, "My philosophy and religion have undergone considerable, if not drastic, revision. I realize now how my utter reliance upon science and reason and my contempt for any intuitive insights and intangible values, which are the very essence of art and religion, was a great mistake, and the way in which I cut mankind off from all cosmic relationship was very short-sighted and arrogant." Many of his followers and admirers dismissed this alleged recantation as a complete fabrication on the part of Margaret, who had always held more conventional religious ideas than her pioneering husband, or attributed it to her baleful influence, or to the weakening of an aging mind. I myself have always understood it as a reflection of Dietrich's upon the impact of his personal ministry, and not a renunciation of his theological evolutionary journey. Of course, this is the risk with an evolving faith, whether personal or collective. It is always possible that we may find ourselves on a dead-end path, needing to make an abrupt about-face. Yet what is the point of free religion, if not to try the wisdom and integrity of many paths, to see where they may lead us as we seek to live with greater human dignity and compassion in this world together? What kind of people do they help us to become? And what kind of communities do they help us to build? What hints can we leave for those who come after us, our own children or others who might benefit from the lessons of our experience? My own experience of assertively secular humanists has been that they sometimes disparage what I would call human spiritual needs for ritual, tradition, rites of passage, expressions of reverence, and deeper than practical response to tragedy and evil as indulging some sort of weakness that it would be better to overcome. Some people think they are secular humanists because they are not aware of non-theistic religion as an authentic possibility. A religious humanist understands the importance of shaping and being shaped by that which is of worth in their lives. They are aware of the ways in which human beings need the various kinds of reconnection that religion, by definition, offers. To me, these functions are part of a well-ordered life, as humanist Clarence Skinner observed. There are many options for the experience of institutional community, but only the religious one knows what to do when we are each confronted by the inherent tragedies of the human condition. Theological argument can always be indulged in for its entertainment value, but it will go nowhere in transforming attitudes and very little way in meeting anybody's real needs for consolation or comfort. I am not unaware of a popular perception that some humanists can be overly sensitive to things like the use of religious language or ritual or certain kinds of music. There's even a stereotype of the crotchety humanist elder scowling throughout Sunday morning and then verbally accosting the leader afterwards for some perceived deviation from correct humanist doctrine. While this is by no means a universal character, stereotypes arise out of our shared experience, and such people certainly exist. I see most of them as much like my own parents, inarticulately bitter because their lives did not turn out as impressively as they originally hoped. Thus, they confront death with neither the promise of immortality nor having left a personal mark upon the world that was supposed to compensate for the loss of heaven. My experience of assertively secular humanists is that they often disparage what I would call human spiritual needs for ritual, tradition, rites of passage, experiences, and expressions of reverence, and a deeper than practical response to tragedy and evil as indulging some sort of weakness that it would be better to overcome. Speaking of his own approach to pastoral care, Dietrich once said, "We must be able to look trouble and suffering in the face and cope with it in a manly way." Historically, humanism and its leadership have been overwhelmingly male, to say nothing of white. In the early 20th century, the membership of the American Association for the Advancement of Atheism, for example, was 93% male. For much of the 20th century, the board of the American Humanist Association was overwhelmingly male, and even at the turn of the millennium, the board of the International Humanist and Ethical Union had 6 men and 3 women, and 3 of its 4 top staff were male. Apart from the fact that humanism is no more immune from large cultural structures of sexism and oppression than any other movement, including Unitarian Universalism itself, why should this be? Is there something about the way humanism has traditionally been presented as a philosophical or religious perspective that has made it less attractive to women than men. It is perhaps worth noting that my own path beyond the aesthetic austerity of early 20th century humanism led through the gate of feminist spirituality. While images of a father god were prohibited as infantile and wishful thinking, it never occurred to anyone in the course of my religious upbringing to warn me away from images of the goddess, especially the multiple, diverse, and playful imaginings offered by a ritually abundant, non-dogmatic neo-paganism. My theological education and formation for ministry coincided with the development of feminist neo-paganism as a theological option to be taken seriously, but never literally, in UU circles. I had too much academic skepticism to swallow the narrative of a prehistorical female paradise whole, but also too much impatience with patriarchy to dismiss its mythically suggestive implications of that narrative. When all theology is understood as metaphor, and what else it could possibly be has never been apparent to me, the poetic imagination is set free to seek both poignancy and power, and to worry about translating back to the literal mind later. This was the liberation that feminist spirituality provided for me and a handful of others. Dietrich's type of heroic humanism focused on achievement and accomplishment to an extent that was impossible for women to succeed at while trapped in the patriarchal double bind. If they managed to demonstrate intellectual competence without becoming visible failures at the emotional labor that was their inherited cultural assignment, they were greeted with patronizing surprise and enduring distrust. Humanism was for intelligent men who had outgrown the constraints of their childhood faiths. This would make it inaccessible to children, including those raised within it, and to the leisureless and uneducated, as well as largely to women, was not necessarily the least of its implicit charms for an academic male constituency. I would contend that humanist institutions, both within the larger Unitarian Universalist Association and outside of it, have always suffered from the inability of their leaders to understand, appreciate, or be competent at the emotional labor that is required to build communities and keep voluntary associations functioning. To the extent that the now current claim that humanism is declining has any truth to it, that decline is a response not to the inadequacies of its philosophical foundations, but to the brittleness of its institutional structures and leadership. I am often asked what I foresee as the future of humanism, both within the context of the UU movement and beyond. Much of my answer depends on how humanism is defined. It seems to me that there will always be people in every religious tradition and outside of any religious traditions who want their beliefs and values integrated with their rational understanding of the world and all the facts they currently know. There will always be people who are, either by nurture or nature and training, skeptical of truth claims put forth on behalf of ancient traditions or idiosyncratic revelation. There will always be people less concerned about imagining their own next lives in other worlds than they are about managing this one well. There will always be people who measure their ethical structures by the outcomes they produce for the well-being of individuals, for the common good, and for the interdependent web. These people may or may not choose to call themselves humanists, but they will be doing what humanists do. They may or may not be aware that in so doing they stand in an intellectual lineage. The institutions that the humanist impulse has built in the present day may or may not survive as institutions, depending on their ability and willingness to adapt in the service of the human needs of the moment. The magisterial American humanism of the early 20th century was certainly era-bound, and even now, I suspect, is not retrievable. Within the UU context, humanism needs to continue its evolutionary process to develop an articulate vision of personal and collective human thriving that looks beyond mere freedom from intellectual and spiritual coercion. To assume that in the absence of such coercion, a fulfilling life automatically happens is evidence of humanism's origins in a culture of privilege. If it can offer a set of positive commitments and practices that help people to live connected, creative, and meaningful lives, as well as responsible lives, humanism will be cherished. To the extent that it cultivates arrogance, fruitless intellectualism, political dogmatism, and/or interpersonal cluelessness, it will properly dwindle into an anachronism and ultimately be replaced by some other incarnation of the same theological impulse, which is fine with me. The transient and the permanent in humanism, evolving, as you might say. Some people think that they are secular humanists because they are not aware of non-theistic religion as an authentic possibility. They are aware of the ways in which human beings need the various kinds of reconnection that religion by definition offers. To me, these functions are part of a well-ordered life, as humanist Clarence Skinner once observed. There are many options for the experience of institutional community, but only the religious one knows what to do when we must navigate the tragedies of our own mortality and finitude. I'm not unaware of a popular perception that some humanists can be overly sensitive to things like the use of religious language or ritual or certain types of music. There's even a stereotype of the crotchety humanist elder scowling throughout Sunday morning and then verbally accosting the leader afterwards for some perceived deviation from humanist doctrine. While this is by no means a universal character, stereotypes arise out of our shared experience. Such people certainly exist. I have met several, some within my own family of origin. I've seen many of them as much like my own parents, inarticulately bitter because their lives did not turn out as impressively as they had once hoped. Thus they confront death with neither the promise of immortality nor having left a personal mark upon the world that was supposed to compensate for the loss of heaven. Nevertheless, I do not foresee that the human need for communities of shared inquiry and meaning formation will be lost to our evolution as creatures or societies in any future we can reasonably predict. Whether called by the name of religion or something else, I'm inclined to believe that the functions of religion will persist, and so will the evolutionary impulses that drive the emergence of the humanist perspective, which I think is and will always be a good thing. So let's once again stand as we are able and join together in song.
Thank you.
chalice flame, sending the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment out into the world. And these we also carry in our own minds and hearts until we are together again. So may we look well to this day and cherish this fleeting autumn season so that all our tomorrows might be visions of hope and every yesterday a memory of beauty and happiness. Let us look well, my friends, to this day. May we live this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, gracious in awareness, courageous in thought, generous in love. So be it.